Welcome to Module 1. In this module, we will look at the counselor as the person and professional. We'll be focusing on you as the developing counselor, therapist, even psychologist, focusing mainly on both as a person and as a professional. The big idea in Chapter 2 is captured in the line, such as, if you look at the slide, you'll notice that we are trying to focus the most important instrument in the therapeutic process is you as a person. This does not mean skills doesn't matter. It means that your skills land through your presence, your self-awareness, your ability to build trust, your cultural humility, and your capacity to manage your own reactions. By the end of this recording, you should be able to name key characteristics of effective counselors, explain how personal therapy supports professional growth, define bracketing and apply it to value conflicts during the sessions with client, describe multicultural competence as awareness and skill and knowledge, identify common new counselor challenges and self-practices. As we move forward, I would like you to take a pause and reflect. What kind of instrument do you want to be for your clients? Steady, challenging, warm, direct? What do you want clients to feel in your presence? And as you saw earlier, we can look at the learning objective in this Chapter 2. Let's anchor our roadmap. Objectives here include identifying characteristics of the counselor as a therapeutic person, benefits of personal counseling, and the concept of bracketing, which means managing our personal values so we don't contaminate the process. As you listen and watch these PowerPoint slides and the lecture, keep an eye on two lenses. What does this mean for my practice next time when I take another class, such as when you go to advanced classes, the practicum? What does this mean for me as my personal development starting this week? Again, imagine two counselors using the same basic skill, reflection of feeling. One sounds scripted, the other feels genuinely attuned. Same technique, but different instrument, right? And here you see we will be looking at the counselor as a therapeutic person. As you think of, this part also provides you an opportunity to be a therapeutic person, right? We have to make sure that we are often assessing our own values. For example, the author emphasized self-evaluation. If you remember taking the knowledge check in your Cengage Mind tab or in a student manual, you are given opportunity to self-evaluate and expand your awareness and build foundation for professional abilities. A helpful way to think about this chapter is professional identity. It isn't just I know theories. It's I can show empathy. I can also show up ethically, culturally responsive, and with enough self-awareness that my reaction does not hijack the work, right? If you think of a client share anger toward a parent, if that activates your unresolved family story, you might rush to advise. Again, you should have boundaries. Instead of staying with the client's meaning making, instead of trying to interpret the client's reaction as if it's a personal attack, you would work toward what triggers certain reaction, what triggers such reaction, right? So the counselor as a therapeutic person, this section is about the relational and human aspects of counseling. And if you look at the sentence, the counselor as a therapeutic person, you will hear, what qualities do I already have that support counseling? Now, typically when I do this in class, reflect on what makes you attracted to this field, right? And you will see I have heard students share, like, I'm good at listening, I'm good at providing empathy. People feel easy to share their problems with me. So you show that quality. And what qualities do I need to develop to avoid doing harm? And sometimes you are driven to this profession, but you might find I may need to practice certain skill. I may need to pause before I provide guidelines to people. So those are important reflections that you can have when you are trying to be a counselor as a therapeutic person. Let's translate this list into some observable behavior, right? Have an identity. You can name what matters to you and what kind of counselor you're becoming. Open to change. You can receive feedback without collapsing or getting defensive. Life oriented. You help client move toward growth, not just symptom control, which is very much focused on recovery oriented paradigm where you are not strictly abiding by the list of symptoms, DSM-5, or the manual that you receive from your workers. Authentic, sincere, and honest. You don't perform a role, you relate as a therapist. A sense of humor. You can be human, relieve tension appropriately when necessary, and also be mindful of possible, positive and sometimes negative impact of using humor. And that is, again, it's a mastery through practice, mastery through perfect skills. It comes eventually as you work with clients at different caliber. Make mistakes and admit them. You repair ruptures rather than sweep it under the rug. Live in the present. You don't spend the session trapped in your head about doing it right. I need to help my client. Sometimes just listening, just allowing client to express themselves would be way more helpful than you trying to offer a set of skills or tools for your client. Now, think about which one is easiest for you and which one is hardest. And here, in addition to what we just saw, this list continues to go beyond the personal reflection. There are some cultural awareness, genuine interest in others' welfare, interpersonal skills, meaning in the work, passion, and healthy boundaries. Boundaries matter because they protect clients and that protects you as well. Passion without boundaries becomes burnout or blurred roles. Another quick example here. A client says, "Can I text you anytime when I'm anxious?" A boundary bound or a well-established boundary would be, the counselor validates the need and clarifies structure. If I were to say, "I'm glad that you told me how intense the anxiety feels. Let's build a between session plan and talk about what supports are available after hours." Now, in that response, you did not neglected your client or rejected their request. You rather provided them, you appreciated and you acknowledged how they feel, and also gave an opportunity to find other resources that will support them. With that in mind, let me ask you a question right here. Now, here's a scenario. You can also take a moment to reflect on this situation, right? You've been treating client for 6 weeks and you find some attractions toward the client, and it becomes difficult for you to maintain therapeutic relationship. In those situations, you also notice that client have responded in certain way that just makes it worse. And what do you do now? I tend to give extreme examples so you're able to practice. What does this look like? We will talk about transference and countertransference, but I want you to take a pause and think about this situation. When these kind of incident happens, how do you respond, right? Okay. Yeah, and if you, again, going back, if you take a pause, if you're able to look at this scenario, this mostly the example is about countertransference. Again, we will look into that idea a little more, but attraction happen, right? Acting on those attraction or understanding having that awareness is critical, right? How do you cannot constantly make referral for your client because you feel that attraction or the client feel attraction towards you. That's why you need to be aware of your biases, your unresolved, sometimes unsurfaced issues, which will allow you to advance without constantly letting go of client just because this issue appears again and again. And here we're moving into why counselors benefit from being clients, right? Personal therapy for counselor. This is not about being fixed. It's about development, humility, and learning how therapy feels from the inside. Just imagine, right? If you are talking about self-care, you talk about different technique in the therapy, and people have asked, how much do you share with your client? Well, as much as it helps your clients to understand their situation and also build trust, build strong rapport, therapeutic alliance, and sharing your experience in therapy, not necessarily the detail, your experience as a client may benefit those individuals to build strong relationship and strong trust in the therapeutic process. So, personal therapy for counselor. The slide name has names three ways personal therapists support professional work. One, it offers a model of practice. You watch an experienced therapist and learn what helps. It can enhance interpersonal skills. You're able to translate. You're able to translate some of the skills that you've been wanting to practice into your professional skills. It helps therapists manage the ongoing stresses of clinical work. Being a therapist is a lot of work. You constantly offer empathy, compassion, listening. That could lead to stressors, that could lead to burnout. And having a personal therapy allow you to, as a therapist, manage those stressors. A counselor who has experienced effective rupture repair as a client is often more able to say, I think I missed your last session. Can I revisit that? Instead of avoiding discomfort. Those kind of simple acknowledgement can lead to a major, shift in your practice. And in here, in here, a practical takeaway from this personal therapy often increases your tolerance for ambiguity because client comes with many problems. It allows you to have patience toward various emotions and also not knowing part, skills new counselors struggle with very often. It can also reduce the chances that you use clients to meet your own needs. For example, validation, control, or rescue fantasies, right? If you go back to your student manual, you may find, how personal therapy help you and how do you perceive that should be a very good place to reflect and engage in self-reflection. Again, let me ask you another question here. Now we shift to values, where counselors can unintentionally do harm through subtle pressure, judgment, or helpful advice that's actually value imposition. We have our own way of looking at problems. As a counselor, as a therapist, you may have a lot more skill than your client. So you want to be careful that we are not imposing values on our client in the name of helping, right? This slide reminds you of the broader course structure. Approaches vary, but values and the therapeutic relationship cut across different theories. No matter your orientation, you will influence goals you prioritize. Again, if it is collaborative, that's much better. What you label as healthy, and again, be mindful what your client might say about it. How you interpret behavior, your way of understanding how behavior works, and value awareness and bracketing skills, right? That is extremely important when you think of these therapeutic approaches. And we will be going over these therapeutic approaches in detail later down the semester. Okay, let me ask you another question before we move on with this slide. Becoming an effective multicultural counselor. I'm trying to pause here. Okay, becoming an effective multicultural counselor. Now we connect values to culture. Cultural competence isn't a checklist you complete, it's an ongoing development. Myself, in my journey, as I learned East Asian culture, South Asian culture, now in the United States, learning the Western culture, I always feel like there is so much to learn about culture. You work with different population, that allows you to expand your cultural awareness. I work with students, faculty, staff across 22 campuses in my role as mental health first aid trainer and coordinator. In this experience, I have seen, culture and subculture practices that in fact has been ongoing development rather than like, I got it kind of attitude. And if you look at becoming an effective multicultural counselors, the multicultural competence as beliefs, attitudes, knowledge, and skills, intervention strategies, they all take time. If you look at the student manual, you find some concrete developmental ideas, examining your own cultural heritage, training, workshops, supervision from skilled multicultural counselors, reading new articles, joining professional groups, and engaging community events and socio-political change efforts. Those are different ways to enhance your multicultural competence. Think of this situation. A couple come in, one partner is a recent immigrant who is reluctant to self-disclose and doubts counseling is helpful. A culturally responsive stance would explore their worldview and expectation instead of labeling the person as resistant. If you remember taking this question in the textbook, in your student manual, or in the Cengage, you may remember, just because somebody is resistant to share their ideas does not mean they are not good fit for counseling. I often tell, I love challenging clients. When somebody is challenging, I use that challenge as an opportunity to explore deeper underlying problems. How could you engage and allow a client who is culturally different from you to teach you about their culture? Take a moment to reflect on this question. And I'll pose a question, a knowledge check question here. Now we normalize the beginner experience. Anxiety doesn't mean you're unfit for this profession, right? It means you care and you're learning. I remember my first session, about 20 minutes in, I do not remember anything my client said. I was very self-conscious, trying to observe myself, trying to see if I'm doing everything right. In that process, I missed everything my client was sharing. So this slide, in next slide, yeah. This slide lists common challenges: anxiety, being yourself, self-disclosure, perfectionism, being honest about limitations, silence, client demands, and client who lack commitment. Now, let's pick a couple from here. And I would love to talk of all of them, but for the sake of time. Dealing with anxiety. Try naming it internally, grounding and returning to the client's process. Anxiety often drops when you shift from performing to being with your client. Self-disclosure. Use disclosure with intention. If is this for the client's benefit or myself? If you remember in the manual, in the knowledge check, monitor your motivation for disclosure. I often tell, how much is a good disclosure? I would definitely, if client resists or client is wondering, if I ever been to therapist, if I ever use therapy for myself, I would gaze and share as much as information that would help my client to advance. Again, I like that, the disclosure should be intentional. It should be beneficial for your client to advance rather than redirect the focus toward yourself. And if you look at the third one, silence. Silence has many meanings. At least I know 5 of them, right? It could be a moment to process. It could be respect. It could be gathering their ideas. It could be allowing people to feel the emotions rather than silence as completely disrespectful or ignoring. So silence can be processing, emotion, avoidance, or cultural style. Instead of filling it fast, consider gentle inquiry. And I have a very special technique. When you are with your client and the client is silent, I would count to 5,000. And that goes, if somebody, you ask a question, it's your client to say something, you can silently, internally, you can let the client process and count inside your mind 1,001, 1,002, 1,003, 1,004, 1,005. I assure you, within that 5 seconds, the client will find a thought, a sentence to share with you. And that's where, like, what's happening for you right now in this quiet time, right? That allows the client to process and connect with you. So, on that note, let me ask you another knowledge check question here. This slide continues with additional challenges that therapists face: tolerating ambiguity, countertransference awareness. Countertransference is the therapist having a strong, either positive or negative. That means either you are angry or you're attracted toward your client due to some of the unresolved issues. The idea comes from Sigmund Freud psychoanalysis, and those awareness is critical. It doesn't mean you should terminate the session. It also gives you opportunity to understand what are some unresolved issues that you have, right? Humor, sharing responsibilities, declining to give advice, defining your role. And those some of the challenges might get resolved when we talk about informed consent form, right? And client may ask, just tell me what to do. Now, this is again depending on the cultural background. I know people, those who come from collectivist and Asian culture, they tend to seek prescription, right? They tend to ask for solution, unlike more Western and more individualist culture. And in those situations, I can help you clarify options and consequences. I can support you experimenting with new behaviors. And also, but I don't want you to take over your decision making. So you're allowing client to be autonomous, at the same time supportive. And if you are having countertransference experience, ask yourself, what am I feeling? What story am I telling myself about this client? What do I want right now? And is it about me? Those kind of questions will reassure that you are aware about your countertransference. If you're unsure about the answers, that's a cue for supervision, right? So take a moment and reflect. What specific concerns or anxiety do I have about beginning as a counselor? We end with self-care as an ethical and professional necessity, not a luxury. Self-care is extremely important. I'm a big proponent of self-care. Whenever you can, whether it is for 5 minutes or 1 hour, make sure you take that pause, free from devices, free from things that you constantly do that adds more stress, and engage in self-care. This slide lists therapeutic lifestyle changes. That could be physical activity, diet and nutrition, being in nature, relationship, recreation, spiritual involvement, and service to others. You all can also expand if you look at some of the materials in the textbook and the student manual, if you have access to. Adequate sleep, exercise, proper diet, meditation, relaxation, friends with mutual giving and receiving, realistic goals, learning limits, self-forgiveness, and seeking counseling for professional development. Instead of I should do better self-care, choose one measurable therapeutic lifestyle change for the next few days. Right? Take a 20-minute walk. and take no email after 6 p.m. One pure consult. So any of these changes should make you, your heart fills with compassion, heart fills with empathy, and also you are re-energized to take upon more work. Now, as we leave this slide, I want you to take a moment to think, what is the easiest therapeutic lifestyle change for you to sustain? Which one is the most neglected? And here's a list here. I want you to choose one and make it a priority for the next few days. That will help you to identify, what is my priority in this list. Okay, let's wrap up the core ideas. Slides. The counselor personhood and the relationship are central. Technique matters, but it's more so who you are as a person. And the other important part I really want to mention here is who are not therapeutic. When I teach this in-person class, I ask students to make a list of who do you think is not very good as a therapist. And the student often list, it's funny, sometimes they list parents, friends, co-workers. Those people are biased. Those people have strong opinion. Those people offer you solution. Those people have limited patience to hear your concerns. Those are the qualities you don't want in a therapist. And this is like my approach sometimes. When I don't know exactly what is a good approach, I try to identify what are some bad approaches. So staying away from bad approaches lead you toward the good approaches, right? So personal therapy is critical. Supervision is extremely important. Understand your values. Learn to bracket so you avoid imposing them. Cultural competence is an ongoing process. Beginners challenge are normal. You constantly face them. And self-care is ethical mandate or ethical practice to prevent burnout, right? And I want you to think of which part of this information seems I want to focus on, right? Before you go out, let me ask you another question on this note.